Hi, I'm here with Tim Flagg, CEO and co-founder of UKAI. You are the UK's dedicated trade association for AI businesses. Where do you feel right now that most mid-market firms actually are with AI adoption? And what's holding back the ones that haven't moved yet, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, great to be here, John. And I think it's a really exciting time right now because not only are people now talking about AI, but they're actually building AI and they're thinking about the key critical word, which I think we're going to talk about today, which is adoption. So for us, we've seen the change in society over the last year when it comes to AI. And there's still a lot of anxiety and a nervousness about that, both in terms of what AI is, how it's going to affect me individually, but also now there's sort of anxiety about how do I get started. So I think, I want to sort of look at this through a very sort of human lens as we go through this. But yeah, in terms of your question around, how are businesses actually adopting this? There've been quite a few studies really looking at the way in which businesses have approached this and the difference between just getting started and starting to scale some of those AI projects. And the figures seem to be quite consistent, and it's something like around 20 to 25% of businesses are now in that exploratory phase where they're trialing things, they're getting started. And that's good. But then the question is, well, what's happening with the rest of the 75% of the organization? Are they just not doing anything at all? Or as what we hear anecdotally, and of course this is quite hard to quantify, is the use of shadow AI. So effectively what you've got is a lot of people who are using it correctly. They're using it within the guardrails which an organization has given them. They're using the software which the organization has ensured is consistent with all of their policies and it's safe and secure. But then other people who are using completely different systems, it's very unstructured. They're bringing their own kit, they're bringing their own platforms, and they're not really adhering to those guardrails. And there is a big challenge there. There's a big challenge around security. We're doing a lot of work looking at the cybersecurity risks as individuals are not just using shadow, but also using new types of AI tools, such as agentic tools, racing ahead to use those without really thinking about the risks and challenges. But there's also a challenge within the organization itself, because you've got these teams who are trying to sort of actually drive adoption and get more people on board in the organization. And what happens if everyone's not on the same page is that you try these pilots, you get so far, and then they fail. And then because everyone's on different pages and at different levels and not using the same systems, then people sort of will say, oh, well, AI failed, right? Without really sort of thinking about which bit of AI it was that failed and whether it was a fair test and all these other sort of secondary challenges. So I think there's also a big risk there that unless we're doing it in a systemic way, then we undermine the opportunity to actually drive adoption and get companies.
I think a couple of questions that come out of that. I mean, firstly, the kind of the human in the loop, and the power of humans to really drive this agenda within organizations, I think is critical. So within that 20-25% of people who are adopting it, from what you're seeing with your members and anyone else you're talking to, what are the people who are doing this best? What are they doing that the others aren't?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's the multi-million-dollar question is, how do we actually get this AI transformation right? And over the last 15 years, there's been a lot of talk around digital transformation. I'm sure everyone remembers that term. It's been kicking around now for the last 15 years. And I've been working in that space as well. And sort of the key thing that we've been talking about in transformation is the mindset and culture change. So for me, this is as relevant as ever. What do we mean by that? Well, actually, it's about being able to set up the ability to be curious. So because things are moving so quickly, and this, as I say, we started talking about this 15 years ago, if not before, because the pace of change with technology back then was so fast that there was no way you could just go and learn about something and then is a one and done. You have to continually improve and learn about what's coming next and how things are changing and scan for who that vendor or who that tool is going to be. And that was 15 years ago. Now, with AI-powered tools, things are moving even faster and there's even more choice and solutions of vendors. So unless you have that curiosity to go out there and be thinking about what's next, trying things out, discovering things, reading those blogs, listening to those podcasts about trying to understand all of those things, then you're just not going to be able to keep up. I'd say that the second part of that, though, is around resilience, because with all of that, that huge scale that I've just mentioned, all those kind of things are happening, it can be overwhelming. And frankly, I think almost part of being in this industry is it is overwhelming. You can't expect to understand everything, and there's so many different parts to this. So in order to get past that feeling of overwhelming, you need to have this resilience. And so I think resilience is a key part of the mindset as well. The ability to realize that you need to keep on learning, to test things out, and to know that you're going to test some things which are going to fail and then learn from them. So that whole sort of test and learn iterative approach, data to be able to experiment, data to measure your experiments, and then to learn from those experiments is key. So I think data-driven decision-making and the ability to test and learn and have that iterative approach, all of that together comes into this kind of very adaptive mindset. So I think that is key. And the whole successful AI transformation comes down to organizations that have started to build that culture, started to build that mindset with all those principles I just out. And what we found is that the companies who've got into that transformation project early, 10 years ago, for them, when AI came along, it's just another technology. So they didn't have to try and suddenly scramble around to try and, figure out how we're going to do AI transformation. They'd already been scanning, they'd all been testing, they'd all been figuring a few things out. They had that curiosity, that resilience, that data-driven experimentation, all of that. And so they just kind of brought it into their normal daily routines and they scaled it up from there. That's a very small minority of companies who have actually gone through that transformation project successfully. And now what's happening, what we're seeing is this sort of the rest of the companies all kind of almost running around saying, well, we need to do this transformation now. We need to do an AI transformation. And they're thinking it specifically, we need to get AI into the organization without thinking about the culture and without actually thinking about what the business needed and what the problems are, and then what the technology is that would allow them to suit that. So yeah, I think that to your question, what do the companies who are succeeding in this space have? It is that culture that they've built. It is that sort of that process of transformation that they've gone through.
It's really interesting. So I've heard you talk about the organizations that have done digital transformation previously and done the groundwork previously, being the ones that are in the best place to do this. And what you've talked about quite a lot there was more of the kind of the human, the HR, the people angles, culture, mindset, etc. And that has really come out in our research over the past few months, how important that people function in organizations is to driving AI adoption, frankly, any kind of adoption, but specifically AI adoption in organizations. Is that something that you are talking to your members about as well? And how can people really try and help their people teams and their people leaders with this particular piece?
Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right. It does come down to the people. And that's, I think both the opportunity and the challenge, right? So at a senior level, the leaders need to understand their role in setting out the vision and encouraging that culture. I'm simplifying this, but at a managerial level, it's from a people perspective, it's about understanding how you can encourage your team and how you can set realistic KPIs that the team can then actually work towards. And I think what we're going to see, we're already starting to see, is some at that manager level, them having to start thinking about what hybrid teams look like. And how do they encourage their teams to not just use AI-powered tools, but use agents? And where do those agents fit into those teams? And then what does that do to the KPIs and the responsibilities of the humans? And back to this phrase, which is being used everywhere now, the human in the loop. Those managers have a really important role to play, inputting into those systems, those agentic systems, and then the output, the quality control at the other end to make sure it's actually delivering. So a real sort of, a change in the role of the managers. And then the everyday employee, really sort of them being given the confidence to be able to experiment and try new things and collect the data to understand whether it works. But also just that sort of training to really get them up to a certain level of confidence. Because what we see at that sort of everyday level is it's often just about confidence, that people, they feel they don't know what AI is, in quotation marks, because it can be such a huge bewildering thing. And so they almost don't see how to get started, or they don't see the point of getting started. But actually, once you start sort of demystifying it and showing them some of the simpler ways of getting started and some of the ways it can really help them and how it's relevant to their jobs, they love it. And, one of the ways that we often do in some of our workshops is using some of these no-code tools where you can actually speak just like you would in, a normal conversation, And then you'll see a tool like Lovable actually create slides where these things just kind of come to life. And you go from an audience, a group where people are sort of leaning back as a cross-armed and a bit wary, not seeing how this is relevant, to suddenly leaning forward and like, wow, and it's that moment when you can give them feed their curiosity, show them it's relevant to them, and then they can start to kind of see the magic and they start to get engaged with it. So different things at different levels, but fundamentally agree. Yes, it is a people driven change, and it will continue to be a people driven change. And for me, the opportunity is making sure that people understand how they can get engaged in this, because I don't think it's going to be necessarily the people who get left behind. If they're curious and they have this mindset, they're going to be the people who are going to be helping to shape what the future looks.
Yeah, I mean, curiosity was a big. I was talking to Sarah Malden, who's head of AI and automation at Make, the other day, and she was talking a lot about curiosity and how important it was when she's building her team. And that certainly seems to be something. I mean, that again applies in all sorts of areas of business. If you're curious about something, you're naturally going to learn more and be better at it. But I think it's a really interesting insight. I've seen in recent times kind of contrasting comments from a range of people around whether AI adoption should be a top-down or a bottom-up approach in organizations. I have an opinion, but we're not here to listen to my opinions. What's yours?
In terms of whether it's top down or bottom up, I mean, it's a little bit what I was saying before around that sort of empowering, and just to zoom out at a sort of national level, not just individual businesses. It is all about building confidence and trust, because if the humans in the world, in the country, don't understand the point of using AI and they're not using it, then they're not going to be the consumers who are buying the products and services from a lot of our AI companies. They're not going to be the employees engaging with the AI power tools within the organization. They're not going to be the citizens who are using the AI power tools, which our councils and government are trying to use to improve productivity and efficiency. So we need to think of it from that perspective. I'd say there's a consumer driven need, and we need to understand what's holding back those consumers, those citizens, those employees from using AI powered solutions at the moment, or what they worried about, and then help them. And the best way we can do that is through two things: education and trust. And they're two very connected things. So education, I think if we need to focus really on helping them understand what AI is, and that there are many different types of AI, not just the chatbots, which I think pretty much everyone's heard of now, but also the sort of the broader, maybe less sexy parts of machine learning, particularly analytics, the data science. There's so many different areas there. So help people understand that, but also give them examples of where AI is delivering for good, in healthcare that directly is relevant to their families, or how it can help them in everyday tasks, whether that be using a chatbot to interpret a very complex contract they've got from the council or the bank or something, to really help make it relevant for them. So I think it is really critical to have that sort of consumer-led demand. And that's where we're very focused at UKAI, is understanding what's holding back consumers from wanting to adopt AI-powered solutions, and then working with a range of organizations to ensure that they get the information so they can understand it. And ultimately, once they understand it, then they will trust it. I think there's a role to play nationally at that driving consumer demand. And of course, we've already spoken about the importance of that sort of top-down leadership role as well, which in some ways might be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I definitely think it's in essence both. So you touched on data just then, and previously you've made the point that data is a real starting point, not necessarily the tools. For businesses with, a couple of 100,000 people, fragmented CRM, messy ERP data, legacy systems. What do you think these businesses need to do? What's their minimum viable data foundation before AI can do anything useful? Can AI fix all of that for them before they start?
I think you've almost given the answer there. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. You've worked in many organizations like I have over the years, where the legacy data issue is massive, right? Particularly when companies have merged, or they've gone from one CRM to another CRM, or they've just bought in data sets. Often those data sets will just kind of sit there locked away, and there's some very sort of shallow sharing of some of that data, but the vast majority isn't shared. Legacy data, huge problem. And I think there is some use that you can make of that as it is, but the real opportunity is the second bit you went on to say, which is actually using AI powered tools, to actually go and help to recodify that, to clean it up, and to make it into a interoperable database that you can actually then have used across multiple different tools. So we're starting to see a number of our members now who operate in exactly this space, where they go into large organizations and they will have tools that can go out and find all the different data, and then build it into a consistent and interoperable data set that then can be used as the sort of the bedrock for the next project, which those companies ultimately want to do, which is some sort of AI-driven project. And this comes back to a little bit to what we were talking about earlier on, which is, where do you start? Often companies will want to race because they're sort of feeling like they're behind the curve and they've got a bit of FOMO. They'll race to want to have AI, and the top-down question will come: how do we make an AI for our business? It's just often the wrong question. What they should be thinking about is, what's the business need that we have? What's the problem that we have? And then how do we design some technology that actually addresses that problem? And I think if they do try and kind of focus on that problem, then actually they'll be thinking about how they drive that change more effectively. So I think that's one of the areas where we've seen over the last a few months that actually starting with cleaning up the data is it's sometimes the less sexy part of what you need to do in AI transformation, but it's a fundamental part. But when you ask the right question, the majority of cases you'll get to doing these foundational things, cleaning up your data, getting it into consistent formats. And then you can, once you've done that, it unlocks all of the greater things you can do as well. It's also just good discipline though, because I think it actually starts to make the organization recognize the value of the data that they have. And what we're going to start to see over the next few months as people start to bring these data sets together is a kind of a new wave of people recognizing the value of the data that they have within their organizations, whether it be on their consumers, their customers, whether it be on the systems that they operate, on their products. There'll be this renewed interest, which is great, right? I think it's good to see that focus and interest in data again.
I couldn't agree with you more. As you alluded to, I've been in so many businesses where data has been top priority or second priority for the business from a kind of a strategic perspective. And so much data is collected for a variety of different routes, and it's just not used, either because it's fragmented or it's messy or you haven't got the right skills in-house or whatever it might be. There's always a reason. So I do think that one of the most powerful use cases of AI moving forward will be how we can interrogate and use and analyze and kind of action on that data in ways that perhaps a lot of businesses, not all, because some are really good at it, but a lot of businesses perhaps haven't been able to or haven't had the time to in the past. And I think that's quite an exciting opportunity. So you are just moving on slightly. So you, as part of your role at UKAI, you advise government, you sit in APPGs, you consult with various ministers and public servants, including the AI minister. What are you telling or hearing from kind of the policymakers that mid-market businesses and leaders within those businesses need to hear but aren't getting?
Yeah, and thank you. It's one of the parts of our job at UKAI that I really enjoy, which is speaking to a variety of different stakeholders, that you mentioned some of them. And the opportunities there are, they're very keen to engage at the moment. So I was chatting to the AI minister a couple of nights ago, and he is actually, so Kanish Ganarian, the AI minister, he's actually very well versed in AI. He comes from a sort of VC and tech understanding of the industry, but also he spends a lot of time talking not just to our members, but he makes time to speak to businesses across the country. And he's constantly traveling around. So I think that is really good. The fact that we've actually got someone in that role who listens and wants to understand, because, going back to the point I was making before about curiosity, right? You've got to be doing that because this whole industry is moving so quickly. But what we're hearing from them in terms of how the medium-sized businesses can actually start to help is, I think, through two things. One is around adoption. Again, so they see the opportunity for businesses to be able to engage. Like 73% of the employees in the UK are in a small and medium-sized enterprise. So actually they have a particularly important role to play in being the champions, being the leaders, driving the cultures we were talking about before that bring their employees on, and also the consumers who are buying their products and services. So I think there's a really important role for SMEs to play there. But then there's also the other part of those businesses, which is actually they can provide the services and the case studies for how those services can deliver solutions to not just central government, but local government and many other businesses as well. The challenge there comes down to two things, which are kind of related: procurement, public sector procurement, and then investment. And a lot of the businesses that we're working with, they're scaling businesses. They've got to a certain size, and they want to get more customers. They want to get investment so they can do more R&D, so they can scale up what they're doing. Maybe it's an AI-powered tool. Maybe it's something based upon an AI-powered tool. And that, for them, it's the challenge of, well, where do we get the investment from? Do a whole podcast on that particular topic. But I think the government holds within its remit the ability to fast track procurement and to make it easier through some of its agencies, including UKAI. I'm sure everyone's heard of the Innovate grants. I mean, that's a fantastic way, and they're doing some really bold thinking. They've brought some great people in who are really rethinking how they can get that funding to scale ups, particularly within AI, to provide solutions which can then be used across public sector needs. But there's also the sovereign AI unit now, and they have a 500 million fund that's being led by James Wise from Borderton VC, who understands how they can start to put that money into some of these scale up businesses. And then just within the public sector itself, a lot of the departments now, they're all thinking about AI. And they've all hired in teams, some really good people into those teams who are thinking about how they can be better customers to buying these services. So the bit that we're trying to unlock is making sure that those businesses who have the solutions can meet the demands from all of those agencies and departments I mentioned there, who want those solutions. And actually, even though it seems really simple, it's actually quite a hard thing to bring those two groups together. But that's what we're focused on doing, because if we can do that, then it means the taxpayer money and through the procurement process can then effectively fund the development of British AI companies, and then that whole ecosystem wins.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. There's so much that can be done in that kind of area. Mid-market firms are getting pitched AI solutions constantly. I mean, I read somewhere recently, I don't know how true this is, that there's 300 new AI solutions on the market globally every single day, which is a bonkers amount. And I couldn't believe it because there's just so many. You've led AI-driven products yourself at organizations like NTX and Intelliquence, but now see the buying side through your membership base at UKAI. What should a leader or a buyer within an SME and mid-market firm be asking vendors that most of them don't think to ask?
That's a really good question. I think the challenge for the entrepreneurs and the people building the businesses now often comes down to what's the IP that you're developing. To give an example, some of the IP that you might have developed 5 or 6 years ago that you might have carefully hand coded and carefully crafted and built and had very expensive engineers build. Now you're starting to see companies come along and they'll just vibe code a whole load of it. Now I'm simplifying, right? But that's sometimes the challenge. And so if you are now putting yourself on the other side of the wall, if you're a buyer looking at how you're going to actually look for a vendor to deliver that solution, you want to know that whoever you're working with actually has got the right mix between something they've developed themselves, and which they own the IP for, but also something which is really robust. So I think that's going to be a critical thing to look out for. But it does get challenging as well, because we're going to see, we already are seeing the rise of lots of vibe coding, and even experienced developers are using it. It just speeds things up, right? So as a buyer has been used, and how do you understand what risks and vulnerabilities that creates within the tool you're buying? But at the same time, we're also seeing the rise of open source. And this is a huge area and a massive opportunity, not just for the UK, but for medium-sized businesses to be able to seize, where it's that classic combination of, you always say the dichotomy is between buy it or build it. If you're open sourcing it, then actually you can get a little bit of both. You can buy in the component parts and then build the bits that you need to customize it. So as we start to move to more of an open source world, then that's more efficient and it's more cost effective. But it then also increases some of those risks that I mentioned before. Understanding all of those issues, I think, is going to be key for any buyer looking at working with a vendor. I'd say the other really big area is understanding the ethics of the vendor that you're working with. And we're going to see this become increasingly important. And if you think back 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, when we saw the emergence of ESG and a much more responsible attitude to be embedded into procurement. It's very embedded into when you're thinking about what vendors to work with. You'll look for their ESG credentials. You'll look B Corp. You want to understand that they're coming from the right place to work with them. We're going to see that with AI businesses as well, where the buyers are looking to ensure that the providers of those solutions have sourced their data in an ethical, responsible way. They're thinking about sustainability. They're looking at bias within their systems. All of those things, they're not just nice to have, fluffy or hippie things. They're actually fundamentally commercial considerations, because you want to ensure that the companies you're buying from are responsible. And those companies, there are a lot of them now recognizing that, and they are identifying that they are responsible as well. So I think that's the other big thing which we're going to see the rise of.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said there is something I'm hearing a lot as well, and actually segues me nicely into my next question. There's been quite a lot of people describing the rise of the vendor ecosystem in AI as a little bit like the Wild West, in
Hmm.
terms of some of the solution providers' attitude towards ethics and risk and governance and all of that kind of stuff. And that then in turn, what I've heard on the other side is that some leaders in SMEs, mid-market firms, worry that trust, governance, compliance, risk will be issues for them as an organization. They don't really know currently how it all fits together. And that risk is then slowing their adoption down. Would you agree with that? Do you think that's real, or?
So you're saying that because they don't have the governance and the regulation in place, some organizations are worried that they can't move as quickly as they'd like to get
Yeah.
those solutions on board. Yeah, I think that's something which there's a bit of paralysis, let's call it that, in terms of making a decision. It's not, I don't think it's become a huge problem yet. I think it's more that companies are asking those questions. Certainly towards the end of last year, we saw a lot of uncertainty around things like the proposed AI bill in the UK. We already had, there were some clear guidelines within that, which were coming into force in some tranches, and people were getting their heads around that. And then there was this kind of proposed UK AI bill, and people didn't really know what was going to be in it and what it was going to cover. And in the end, it ended up having so many things that it could cover. I think that's why it's quietly been dropped, because there's just too much. It would be too contentious. But the uncertainty there, to your point, the uncertainty there about whether that was going to come and what it was going to cover actually meant a lot of making any decisions towards the end of the year, because they thought, well, what if we make the wrong decision and then we find the regulation comes in and we can't do that anymore? Again, simplifying it hugely. But I think regulation is important, but often regulation is seen as being this thing that sort of limits you. And I know certainly it was one of the things when I sort of moved across into doing UKAI, coming from being an entrepreneur, that actually when you hear the word regulation as a business owner, you're thinking, oh, that's just sounds like an extra kind of long document I need to read through, and where I'm not going to have the time to go through that. But actually, the regulation can also be seen as setting standards, reassuring people. And I think that's the critical shift in mindset that we need to be thinking about, that actually it's less about telling people what they shouldn't be doing, and it's more about setting standards and encouraging people to meet high quality standards. And actually in the UK, we're really good. We're really good at the whole sort of standard setting. We've set some of the standards for the world across many different industries. And I think within AI, we can also set standards, building upon what I was talking about before in terms of that responsible AI, that more ethical AI. We can set the standards for that. Green AI, which is something that we've been campaigning for in the last few months as well, setting standards for the whole AI stack to be much more sustainable in the way it uses energy and water. And so there are ways, I think, that the industry itself can structure it to be much more responsible. Going back to the beginning of your question, when you referenced the Wild West, that was absolutely how it felt a year and a half ago when we were setting up UKAI. And in fact, it was one of the reasons we wanted to do this as business owners, because we sort of felt that actually that there are a lot of snake oil salesmen. It is the Wild West. There's a fundamental lack of trust amongst the consumers that we talked about before. But there were some companies who were like-minded, we came together and we said, well, we believe in building a more responsible industry. We believe this AI industry in the UK can be different and can have some principles and can be responsible. And we sort of found like-minded souls with other companies, and that became the foundations for UKAI, because we realized that if we wanted to move from the Wild West to a more mature industry, which is taken seriously, that can actually add value to society, and build that trust, which will then unlock the economic growth. The only way we're going to do that is coming together to form that industry, to shape that industry, to take responsibility for some of the negative sides, the things which people are concerned about, which, we've touched upon everything from the environment to the horrible situation around things like grok, taking responsibility for bias in some of these systems. We as an industry need to tackle those problematic sides of it in order to win the trust for the industry to then be able to grow.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And it's really interesting what you're saying about sitting on the other side of the fence and seeing things from slightly different viewpoint around regulations. There's always two sides to every story, at least, isn't there? Well, I'll finish with one final question, if I may. Itself has gone through your own AI adoption with Ready Intelligence. Would love to know, and maybe you can impart some nuggets of knowledge on what you did internally and the learnings you've got from it, and how you could potentially give advice to other organizations going through the same thing.
Yeah, well, so we use Ready Intelligence. We use a bunch of AI powered tools, as you'd expect for the trade body for AI in the UK. There's a number of things. I think, it really sort of brought into focus the importance of testing things out and failing sometimes, because, you have to, with a lot of these tools, there's not a neat guidebook to say, this is how you start, step 1, 2, and 3. You can ask a chatbot, give me a step-by-step guide. And actually, a lot of these tools will have their own little chatbot, which I found quite empowering, because you can actually go and ask them to give you the context specific. But when you're trying to build them all together, there's not really that much of an overarching playbook. So you have to just try it out. So I think that's the kind of the main sort of learning is we bolted a whole bunch of things together. We played around with things. We see what works. And then I think the other part of that is the human as well, right? That getting it technically to work is one thing, but getting it to work in a way that suits your team and the individuals in your team and how you work is the other thing. That would have been really hard with a standard SaaS tool but actually what we're seeing more of now as we start to build in these different component parts or using different aspects is we can really customize it. And the bit that we're sort of working on now is also trying to sort of build in things like Lovable that allow us to build sort of platforms that bring all these component parts together in a way which is sort of re-suited around our workflow. So I think that's what we're going to start to see within UKAI is just kind of us being able to build these workflows, automated workflows, but also, we're starting to see a lot of other companies in that same boat. Yeah, I think those are the two things.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously doing the same ourselves, and we're trying similar things and facing similar challenges. I personally find it quite a lot of fun trying to figure all of this out and try and work out better ways and easier ways of doing things to free up more of our time to do the stuff that we want to be doing to help us grow as individuals and businesses. So I think that's ultimately how we try and imagine a utopian view of AI and its symbiosis with humans in the future is.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is the dream, I think, isn't it? It's just you got to think about how all these things come together, which humans are quite good at doing. That sort of that master architect view of actually what you want to achieve. You want the business goals. You want the company to, people in the company to be happy. Those kind of human goals. But then you can program that into the machines to actually kind of go and deliver that. But it's important to always have that sort of human, holistic view of where you're trying to get to.
Fantastic. Well, look, Tim, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Everyone here at Able really appreciates it, and keep up the good work with everything you're doing with UKAI.
Thanks very much, John. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to chat to you today. Great questions. And yeah, look forward to being involved with Able and coming along to your event. Thanks very much.